Hello there, it is a Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. This week, we are taking another question submitted by a gentle viewer, and of course, as always, feel free to submit your own. Helps if you include a question mark when you leave a comment. Helps me add it to our ever-growing list. Anyway, this week's is a pretty relatively recent question, but one that I thought was really fun, and one that I kind of felt like delving into a little bit this week. I even have notes here for it, in case I forget some of the details I want to cover, and in truth, I probably will forget some of them. Anyway, this week's question comes from a gentle viewer whose username should be somewhere in the bottom third of the screen right about now, and they ask, what are your honest thoughts on Michael Kirkbride as a writer? Overrated hack, or is his genius justified? A really fun, right? A really fun question, I think. Obviously delivered with some degree of, like, feeling of being flippant, right? So don't take it too seriously. Don't be too distraught over the answer, right? Because this is all in good fun. But my honest thoughts of Michael Kirkbride is he's good. He's all right? Like, yeah. It's like, Michael Kirkbride, for those who do not know, did writing and has done writing and very likely will do more writing, more contributions, at least in the form of in-game books for the Elder Scrolls. Most notably, perhaps has been in like the cultural zeitgeist for his work on Morrowind, where he contributed heavily to a lot of the like background lore, a lot of the stuff that feels very psychedelic, right? And we'll certainly delve into that. But my thoughts on him are like, yeah, he's good. He's proficient. I don't think he's some kind of mind-blowing, mind-boggling genius, but nor do I think like he is completely without merit, right? I think he's quite good at what he does, and that's why like a lot of people enjoy what he sort of contributes to a project, and they have him back on to sort of work on, you know, some of the more, I don't know, ephemeral, ethereal in-game books that you'll find and read, right? You know, in Morrowind, he did the 36 Lessons of Vivek. He came back to do, I think it's the Abadala, I want to say, for Oblivion. I think they also got him back to do something for Skyrim. I know he did a hidden 37th sermon of Vivek for ESO. If he's available, I could totally see them like contracting him to do another book or so, another in-game book for Elder Scrolls 6 whenever that lands, right? Could totally imagine that, assuming he's not busy with other projects, right? Lord knows he's worked on other things. Perhaps most familiar to as many people as possible is he worked on 4 Telltale Games, right? He did the final season of The Walking Dead. He did the two seasons of their Batman thing. And let me see here. Oh, he did Minecraft Story Mode, right? Which is also very much currently, well, maybe not so much anymore, but at least last week, it was definitely in the sort of, I don't know, discourse, as it were. But a lot of this sort of, I don't know, mythology around the guy stems from how he achieved such ephemeral, such almost psychedelic writing, right? And there is a very, I don't know about, well, there is a somewhat famous image and UESP entry, right? Emphasis on that, wherein there is an image and a description of him having like done copious amounts of like imbibed a lot of booze, having taken shrooms and stuff, and he's like passed out or close to passing out on the floor. And the caption sort of purports like, oh, this image, this photo was taken by Todd Howard after Michael Kirkbride spent 7 days and 6 nights crafting the most mind-blowing bit of world building and lore that you've ever set your eyes upon, right? It's very sensational, it's borderline salacious, and like I said, the discourse just kind of ran with it, right? It's kind of spun out from there. And what a lot of people are not aware of, right? A lot of people know of this story, but he has come out and said it's a hoax, right? It's not real. Has he, like, taken substances before? Has he sort of had, like, an episode wherein, you know, I think in his words, he just, like, it was more, I don't know, mundane in that he was smoking, he was just, like, smoking cigarettes, I think he purports, regular alcohol, and just, like, a solitary atmosphere, and he produced the work under those conditions. Not that, like, he was going buck wild or whatever. Like I said, a lot of people purport it. This continues to crop up on social media, like, twice or so a year. Some, like, post or reply to somebody sort of, like, pops off and goes viral. But yeah, he himself has said it's not real. It's the whole post and everything made to look like it's an entry on UESP is completely doctored. I assume that is actually a picture of him, but I don't even know. But he could be doing it for whatever reason. And of course, like I said, the involvement of Todd Howard is because, you know, as Todd Howard has, like, an ever-present, he's ever-present in sort of the discourse around Bethesda Game Studios' games, right? For better or worse. I think both Todd Howard and Michael Kirkbride, they both seem as though they did not reach out for the spotlight themselves, but rather it was thrust upon them, right? Because people like drama, right? People like a little story, right? They don't want it to be so simple that this guy just kind of wrote this thing and he's decently talented at it, right? There's got to be something juicy, right? In a world where there are no video game tabloids anymore, they persist still, you know? A lot of this stems from, like for instance, the inclusion of Todd Howard there. A lot of it stems from sort of when a BGS game does really good. At best, Todd Howard takes on this sort of mantle of being like, well, he's the nerd guy who made it, right? He's the little nerdlinger guy from Chess Club, right? Everybody's like, Todd Howard in the Chess Club or whatever, right? Oh, you hear about it so much. Gosh, if you cover any of this to any degree, let me tell you, it gets real old real fast. How many times have I, just a person making videos about this, have I had to hear people say, it just works, right? I have to hear that so much. I can't even begin to fathom how much someone who actually works there has to hear it. Maybe I hear it more, right? But their social media team, surely, anybody working comms over there. But regardless, like I said, at best, Todd Howard takes on this visage of like, yeah, he's one of us. He's one of the real ones. He's a nerd like me. He made it to the top. Now he's running BGS, and he ain't even running it, right? Todd Howard was never the CEO of it, even though there's like this picture of him being painted as, like I said, either this guy who made it to the top or this puppet master pulling all the strings, and it's why everything has gone wrong, right? Whenever there's a flop or you don't like something, it was Todd Howard doing it. He was the great architect of it all. When in truth, you know, at most he's sort of like the design director, the creative director, right? For a lot of the more recent ones, you know, they're more recent releases. It's not as deep as a lot of people want it to be, right? There's not just one guy behind it all. And in truth, I think they've been doing good, especially with the release of Starfield and all of that. BGS themselves have been sort of making an effort to highlight other members of their team. I've sort of talked about this a little bit in the past. They've done these developer deep dives where they look at like the art team, people doing programming, working in different systems, people getting on there who are other integral parts of the team, not just Todd Howard, right? Although he certainly has attained this sort of star power, right? And certainly marketing, right? Marketing is probably also partly to blame for this because they saw an opportunity and they have seized it, right? They want this guy to be sort of a spokesperson because it kind of falls into place, right? But the same, I think, is also conversely true of Michael Kirkbride, right? Wherein there's this sort of myth that gets woven about this guy, this mythological, boozed up, substance abusing guy who passes out on the floor half naked and he makes the most wondrous creative work you've ever read. When in truth, like I said, it's more mundane than that. He came out and said it. A lot of his influences you can very clearly see in a lot of the things that he specifically worked on, Michael Kirkbride. You can see a lot of things where, like, you know, he himself has talked about it, where he has, like, drawn from real life influences, right? That's one of the more, I think, enjoyable things about the Elder Scrolls is how it mixes and blends together real life cultural influences. You know, a lot of Morrowind sort of draws from Hinduism, I think Buddhism. There's a lot of, right, with the Ashlanders, there's a lot of, like, tribal Afrikaans, I want to say. There's a whole big mix of real life influences, and typically they do it pretty well, right? None of it's like, oh God, this is abhorrent. What have you done? You've completely disrespected this group or whatever. For the most part, most people are like, yeah, this is pretty cool. This is pretty fun. This is a fun way of getting a whole lot of other real life influences rather than, you know, typical medieval fantasy and stuff. A lot of it draws from, like, stuff going on in England, right? In Britain, you know, all of that area of Europe. A lot of it draws from that. And like I said, what's kind of fun is that not only does Elder Scrolls have a bit of that, but it's drawn from other time periods, other cultural groups, and it makes it super cool to see them all meshed together in a fun way, right? And a lot of fantasy is like that, you know? It just so happens that a lot of people enjoy Elder Scrolls games, so you see a lot of them, right? Case in point, really a big proponent of the world building in Pillars of Eternity, and they're no stranger to that. They do a whole lot of world building around it. In Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, there is a lot focused on, like, Pacific Islander culture and stuff tied to, like, the Philippines, which I thought was super cool, being half Filipino myself. I really enjoyed it, right? I thought it was handled very well, very respectfully, and very interestingly in how it was used to explore the fantasy world, right? How it was sort of spun out from there. But yeah, that's the through part of it. That's the sort of takeaway, is that, yeah, these are talented people. They've done good things. But it's not as wild as you would want, right? It's not as sensational or salacious as you would think. Kirkbride has gone on to work on other things. You can see from there how it's worked out. You can see other sort of similar works from other creators, other people who have made stuff, like look no further than Disco Elysium, which also has its fair share of psychedelic world building and, like, ethereal, ephemeral vibes at times, right? Which also, like I said, I believe seemingly involved substance abuse of some kind, but not to quite the same degree, right? A lot of it is just folks wanting a story and kind of running with it and it going viral because more folks want that story. More folks want that sort of relationship wherein, even though we're talking Morrowind here, like I said, Todd Howard is playing the straight man, as it were, and Michael Kirkbride is this loose cannon. What's he gonna do next? What's this mad genius going to devise next? And it's not as wild as that, right? It's not so wild. You can track down other works that he's worked on and sort of compare with that. You can see times when he's replied. Did you know Michael Kirkbride has his own Reddit account where in the past he has done Q&As, right? You can look through stuff that he's written and answers that he's made himself, right? His own feelings on these things. Similarly, like I said, there are other people working on this team. It's not just like I remarked on with Starfield. I think it's great that they're sort of showing off more people who worked on their games and who do work on their games. In the case of Morrowind specifically, there were other folks. For instance, perhaps most notably was Ken Rolston, who has gone on to do other things. Here I've got notes just in case. For their like main principal, like writing and quest design, there was also not just Ken Rolston, but Douglas Goodall and Mark Nelson. Mark Nelson and Rolston sort of famously went on to work together on Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning, another game which I've been asked to cover a whole lot here, and another game which kind of had an infamous vibe about its CEO, who is a major, like, jack-off, right? And sort of screwed over the entirety of a lot of those other people working there. There is also stuff about how Mark Nelson himself, a lot of the kooky, funny stuff in Morrowind that would be go forward into other games and sort of be expanded upon. Mark Nelson was responsible for a decent amount of that. Like, for instance, Tarhiel, the wizard who falls at the beginning of the game if you decide to go up the hill, right? If you decide to go more like northwest out of Seyda-Neen. Mark Nelson is the person responsible for that little bit showing up, apparently. So too, the lusty Argonian maid. That is Mark Nelson. Also, like I mentioned, Douglas Goodall, also kind of a quirky, fun individual, right? You know, they're a writer, right? They're a writer for a video game. Can you believe it? That they're a little bit of a quirky, like geeky, nerdy person, right? But regardless, would sometimes show up on forums and stuff, Elder Scrolls forums, writing in character as Joe Basha, would go on to write additional things for Elder Scrolls on an unofficial capacity, right? There's no end to this sort of thing. I think we run a risk when we sort of lean too much into, like, giving into sensationalism and, like, auteurship when it comes to games, right? Wherein this is something that I talk about a lot, very frequently, whenever I play a BGS game. Specifically when it comes to Todd Howard, right? And like I said, I don't think Todd Howard himself is necessarily wanting this, right? At worst, it feels like it's marketing, you know? But very much where it seems like this one guy is responsible for the whole game. And some people definitely do it tongue-in-cheek, but you can definitely tell that there are quite a few folks who aren't so tongue-in-cheek about, who do think that, honest to God, Todd Howard is pulling the strings from the tippy top and is responsible for the whole thing. We see it all the time. There are many such cases, wherein, for instance, with Fallout New Vegas, once again, there is this sort of sensationalism going on in the discourse wherein, you know, there's this antagonistic behavior, this like purported antagonism between creative or game director Josh Sawyer and BGS, or even specifically Todd Howard. And that is simply not the case, right? Although that game had troubled development and whatnot, Josh Sawyer is very much on the record saying like, oh, well, actually working with their engine was maybe one of the most easy to work with engines to produce assets for and to build our world inside of, right? It was incredibly easy. They were, for the most part, really forthcoming. The pay issues with the Metacritic controversy, which is probably a topic for another in real life video in the future. But if you know what I'm talking about, all of that, they remarked on, that's partly to blame for us here at Obsidian, for putting ourselves under such a timeline. You know, we were the ones who ultimately also agreed to it, so we have some amount of blame to share for it. A lot of this, it's more mundane, more boring than a lot of places make it out to be, right? A lot of these people, if you put them in the same room together, they're for the most part going to be fairly amicable, right? There's not some big scoop about it in this case. Similarly, right, I worry that, like I said, I worry that we attribute too much to auteurship, wherein there's this like reclusive or genius creator who's responsible for everything. When it comes to video games, that is so far from the truth, right? These are, even when it comes to Bethesda games, which have a notoriously small team relative to other games of similar acclaim and reception, we're still talking hundreds of people working on these things, right? Lord knows when you expand it out further, the numbers just swell in size. You really only get that kind of auteurship in indie spaces, and even then, it's multiple people usually working on a project. It's very rare for it to just be one single solitary person with their one single solitary vision, driven by them being multi-talented, right? Even in the case of, like, for instance, one of the bigger success stories in recent times, well, relatively recent, Stardew Valley with, what's his name? Eric, I forgot his surname, but Concerned Ape famously did a whole lot of work on Stardew Valley. But nowadays, there's a bit of a team, right? If you look through the credits for the updates and stuff to Stardew Valley, it's more than just one person now, right? These are very collaborative works. It's a lot of people working together, even people who may not necessarily be within this, like, working on the same portion of the game. They'll bounce ideas off of each other, even at a baseline, right? There's no reason why you wouldn't expect, if an artist and someone working social media or someone programming some ridiculous physics into the engine or whatever, if they're friends at lunch, why would they not say, hey, take a look at this concept art that I did. What do you think of this? And the other person, their friend, is like, oh yeah, I really like that. I really like the, I really remember this from this other game. What if you made it look a little bit more like it, right? With regards to, like, oh, maybe the colors are a bit different or whatever, right? It's so much more vacuous than we think. Because in truth, there's a substantial amount of video game development that is behind doors. We don't know as much as we would think. And I feel like there's such an issue of sort of presuming too much about how games or even specific games are made. And I feel like although having this sort of like crack genius auteur at the forefront of your game can be fantastic for marketing, right? You put on the front a Hideo Kojima game and all of that. I feel like you run the danger of sort of forgetting just how many people are involved in the project, how many people are making decisions that come together. And true enough, it is important to have like a director or creative director sort of honing everything toward one sort of vision, right? That's very critical to sort of making it feel very cohesive. But at the same time, a lot of people are feeding information to this one person, right? And they're sort of whittling it all down, right? They're ideally bringing out the best of what people bring to them to offer, right? So in that sense, sort of, I extrapolate that idea into my thoughts on Michael Kirkbride, wherein, and like I said, and Todd Howard and everyone there, right? And I think it's for the best that we're starting to learn more about these teams. They very clearly tried to make some amount of effort to get more people in front of the camera in these like little talks and interviews and whatnot. I think that's great. Michael Kirkbride, right, to sort of conclude all this, to bring it all back together, Michael Kirkbride is good, right? A talented writer, undoubtedly, I think, right? Very good at like his area of expertise. Very good at like weaving in some sort of, like I said, borderline seemingly psychedelic vibe. If anything, it speaks to his talents that so many people are willing to believe, like, yeah, this guy was doing shrooms. He was like high off his gourd when he wrote this, right? I think that speaks to his talents. And I think we have such a proclivity to lean into, like I said, sensationalism, especially, in this day and age where people make videos, people make posts and stuff where either you just want views or likes or clicks just for the heck of it, or you're monetarily driven, you know? The truth is ultimately, in most cases, not that exciting, right? It's more mundane. It's just talented people working at what they do, right? They're just producing a creative work together, you know? It's like I said earlier, it ain't that deep. Is this something that, like, you know, this singular video can somehow contend with or squash down or whatever? I don't think so. I think it will continue to perpetuate. If anything, I don't know. Maybe it's a danger to be aware of, right? I have no idea. Like I said, also at times they themselves, like these companies, will lean into it, right? It's good for marketing to have an auteur, to put on the front of the box, like, oh, this was made by the creators of, or even better, if you know a name that everybody knows that has some sort of social cachet or whatever, right? I think it's best to just be careful about it and sort of not get too absorbed by the discourse, by the zeitgeist of the moment, get too like sucked into it, right? And think like, oh my gosh, Elder Scrolls 6 would be so good if only they had Michael Kirkbride writing the whole thing, right? Which of course, I don't want to imply that this is what at all, right? This isn't meant to imply, just to make sure, just to cover my butt, I'm recognizing now, I don't want to imply at all that this is what the gentle viewer was sort of implying or whatever at the start when they wrote in their question. More so, we're sort of spinning out the question, talking about more on other levels, right? But yeah, very fun question. Very, very, very interesting, I think. Something that we sort of talk about a lot here, you know, with these BGS games specifically. Good to put it to video with an in real life video. As per usual, if you yourself have a question like this, you can submit it in the comments section if you want. Like I said at the start, really helps a ton if you include a question mark. Apologies as well for my tie knot this week. Had some issues with it. This tie is a lot more like skinny than I was expecting, or not skinny, but thin than I was expecting. So my tie dimple isn't quite what I would like, but perhaps you didn't notice. Regardless, that ought to do it for this week's. Until next time, please take care of each other.